Hello friends, welcome to UPSC Logics, and in this video we shall have a look at the Government of India Act 1858. This was the first of the Government of India Acts, and before this all the acts were charters. So without wasting any time, let's have a look what the Government of India Act had to offer India. As we are aware, there was always a resentment against the East India Company in England. And this particular resentment reached its climax after the mutiny of 1857. The British Prime Minister Palmerston introduced a bill in 1858 in the Parliament for the transfer of Government of India to the Crown. However, before this bill was passed, Palmerston had to resign, and later Lord Stanley introduced another bill which was originally titled as an Act of Better Government of India. This bill was passed on August 2nd, 1858. This was called the Government of India Act 1858 or 1858 Act. On September 1, 1858, the Court of Directors of the East India Company held their last assembly and issued their instructions to the servants in the East. They also offered the Indian sovereign to the empire with these words: "Let Her Majesty appreciate the gift. Let her, the vast country and the teeming millions of India under her direct control, but let her not forget the great corporation from which she has received them, nor the lessons to be learned from its success." So this was the act which transferred the power to the British Crown from the East India Company. Let us have a look at the features of this particular act. Number one, change of power from the East India Company to the British Crown. The designation of Governor General of India was changed to that of Viceroy of India. He was the direct representative of the British government or the Crown, and Lord Canning became the first Viceroy of India. Number 2. It ended the system of double government. Both Court of Directors and Board of Control were abolished. Number 3. Office of Secretary of State. He was a member of the British Cabinet, and he was assisted by a council consisting of 15 members capable of suing or being sued in India and England. Lord Stanley was the first Secretary of State of India, and he was the last President of the Board of Control as well. So what it changed? The Government of India Act 1858 provided that the India was to be governed directly and in the name of the Crown. Number 2, the Act abolished the company rule, abolished the Court of Directors and the Board of Control. Number 3, the Act abolished the dual government introduced by the Pitt's India Act. Number 4, the principle of doctrine of lapse was withdrawn. Liberty was given to the Indian rulers subject to British suzerainty, and it also opened some doors for Indians in the government services. And this of course was done to create a backwater against any other mutiny that could occur in the Indian region, because the Indian rulers were an inherent part of the mutiny. Let us have a look at the features of the Secretary of State for India. And the Act provided for the Crown to govern India directly through the Secretary of State of India, and he would have the powers of both the Court of Directors as well as the Board of Control. Number 2 point is that the office of the Secretary of State was vested with complete authority and control over the Indian administration, so he became the political head of India. He was also a member of the British Cabinet and was ultimately responsible to the British Parliament. And Lord Stanley was made the first Secretary of State of India, and he was earlier the President of Board of Control. Secretary of State of Burma. In 1935, the Government of India Act 1935 provided a new Burma office, and in preparation for the establishment of Burma, a separate colony, but the same Secretary of State headed both departments and was styled on the Secretary of State for India and Burma. So this was on the separation of Burma. And the first Secretary of State for India and Burma was Lord Dundas or Lord Dundas. The Indian Office of Secretary of State for India and Burma came to an end in 1947 when India got independence. And now the Secretary of State for India and Burma was the Secretary of Burma only. And Viscount Ennismore was the first and last Secretary of Burma as Burma got independence in 1948. So these are some important points over here. The first Secretary of Burma and India was Lord Dundas, and the last Secretary of Burma was Viscount Ennismore. Council of India of Secretary of State. So the Government of India Act 1858 provided that the Council of India of Secretary of State shall be formed, and it would consist of 15 members. 7 of them would be elected by the Court of Directors, and the rest of the 8 members were to be appointed by the Crown. And the conditions or the service conditions for these members were that more than half the members must have lived in India for 10 years and must not have left the country more than 10 years before the date of appointment. Then they would be paid around £1,200 a year out of their Indian revenues. And it is said that the Secretary of State of India was empowered to preside over the meetings of the Indian Council, and he had a vote. And he had also a casting vote in case of a tie. And the Secretary of State was also empowered to send and receive secret messages and dispatch from the Governor General, and was not bound to communicate these to the Indian Council. So let us have a look at the centralization process. What happened after the Government of India Act 1858 was implemented, and it established the control of British Parliament over Indian affairs. Number 2, the members of the Parliament could ask Secretary of State of India in regards to the Indian administration. Number 3 point was that the right to appointment to important offices in India was either with the Crown or the Secretary of State of India in Council. Number 4 was the administration of the country became highly centralized, and number 5 was that there was a provision of creation of Indian civil services under the control of Secretary of State. So as we know that the Indian civil services were formed by the Indian Civil Services Act 1861. So let us have a look at the analysis about the Government of India Act 1858, whether it was a formal change or a substantial change. It is said that the Government of India Act 1858 was a formal rather than a substantial change, and the Crown had already steadily increased its control over the company affairs since the beginning of its territorial sovereignty, and the main rules under which India was governed before the passing of the Act were already those of the British Parliament. The British administrators, including the Governor General, were following the instructions of the British Cabinet instead of the East India Company, and it was the President of the Board of the Control was also a member of the Parliament or the Cabinet Ministry of the British Parliament. So as we have seen, Lord Stanley became the first Secretary of State of India, and he was also the President of Board of Control besides being a Cabinet Minister. And the various statutes, charter acts, etc. had already substantially reduced the influence of the East India Company. So guys, this was something about the Government of India Act 1858, and the major substantial change was the changeover to the British Crown instead of the East India Company. And if you are watching this video for the first time, or a video by UPSC Logics for the first time, and have liked the video, do subscribe to the channel. In case you're an old subscriber, don't forget to press the bell icon, as you'll get the latest notifications from UPSC Logics. And thank you so much for watching, and Jai Hind.